Chapter 17. Lal's Library, Houses of Parliament. Thursday, 31st of May, 2463. Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus, 31 A.D. "Evening, Bee," said Andy, rapping at her open door. "The doctor in?" She looked up from her desk and gave him one of her open smiles. "Yes, expecting you?" Andy half considered giving her a wink, but thought the better of it. "Yeah, I left a message asking me to call round. Know what it's about?" "No, I don't." "How is he?" "Heard he got stitched up and he's going." Word had got about the doctor was going to be replaced by Chang's son-in-law, Jian. Chang had bulldozed the WAC to accept that Lal was too academic and someone with more organizational experience was needed to head up the project. The changeover would not happen for several months, and the doctor had been invited to stay on as resident historian. "Afraid so," she replied. "Hasn't said anything to me yet. Locked himself up in his library all day. They certainly stitched him up. He'd never demean himself to work for Chang and his family. That's all it is. Nepotism." "And you?" He'd always rather liked Bee, even fancied her. After all, a dozen years ago, she had almost become family when she and his cousin Douglas had become engaged. He, like Andy, was also a guard, but the headstrong fellow had rashly led his patrol into a firefight with looters, and he, along with 5 of his troopers, had been killed. Bee had resisted Andy's flirtations. She personally knew Andy's plain wife and their 6 children. They farmed his father's holding outside London, near Maidenhead. She also knew about the girlfriend he maintained in some rooms off Regent Street, and had no intention of becoming mistress number 2. "Oh, I don't know," she sighed, sounding weary. "Pray to God something will turn up. Anyway, he's in his library. Just knock on the door and go right in. I'll bring you both a cup of tea." She got up to go to the kitchenette, but Andy continued to loiter provocatively in the doorway, hoping her breasts might brush against his midriff as she squeezed past. She was wise to the ploy and stopped in front of him. "Excuse me," she said firmly. "Library," she pointed along the corridor, "is down there," adding, "and wipe your feet before you tread over his antique carpets." On entering, Andy was surprised to find the doctor lying on a battered leather settee reading. The evening light slanted long shadows into the room. "Oh, hello, Andy," he said wearily. "Come and sit yourself down." He exhaled noisily as he heaved himself up and extended his hand. Andy shook it, seating himself in one of the leather armchairs opposite. The most prominent piece in the room was a large, ornately painted cage, taller than a man, for Lal's parrot, which chirruped and whistled incessantly. It was typical of the doctor. He had once kept a pet cheetah until it had died several years previously. He glanced about the tiers of books on the shelves, the paintings and antiques which cluttered the room. When Lal had chosen his residence, he had purposefully selected the Speaker's house at this corner of the palace. It was reputed to have had the most exquisite suites of rooms. The gilt walls, the ornate Pujan ceilings, and the heavy embossed maroon wallpaper had long gone. Nevertheless, Lal had refurbished it as best he could to its old style. In one of his bedrooms, he even had an original 4-poster bed. What's going to happen to it all when the doctor leaves? Andy wondered. Lal smiled and slapped a magazine down on the table between them. "Just finished reading that Economist you brought the other day. Couple of very interesting articles in it." "Oh, yeah? Good." "Why, yes, of course," he answered back, looking surprised that anyone should ask such a question. What great times they were! How lucky those people were to be able to just go and buy something like this. And that's what I want to talk to you about." "Yeah?" Andy's brow wrinkled. He caught the distinct whiff of alcohol on the doctor's breath. "I'd like you to do a couple of things for me," he began. "Sure. What are you thinking of?" "When do you think you could make another dive into the underground?" "Piccadilly?" "Yes, where you found the case." "Any time," shrugged Andy, "so long as I haven't dived during the previous 12 hours. Day or night makes no difference." "Of course," mused Lal, nodding his head thoughtfully. "You can dive at night," he half smiled. "Never considered that you didn't need daylight to go diving. In fact, that would be preferable. The fewer people who know about it, the better." "And what's this about?" asked Andy. "Something to do with the case?" He noticed that beneath the doctor's left eye there was an involuntary tick. It was off-putting to watch. Must be under pressure. Yes, indeed it is. Quite a mystery. James and I have done some digging around, and some things just don't add up. Do you think you could go down and bring up some bone samples of all the bodies in that train? I would like to make a DNA check of who was down there. Andy raised his eyebrows and puffed his cheeks. He was estimating that each carriage must have about 40 to 50 passengers. He would take Bill with him. They would have to bring up a sample bone from each skeleton, preferably the same one. A jawbone would be ideal to avoid duplication. Yeah, of course I could. With 2 of us, definitely have to go down more than once. 3 or 4 dives, maybe 5. Is it that important? Lyle pushed out his chin and stroked his beard. I don't know yet. It could be, or I could be barking up the wrong tree. Just want to check out this avenue of investigation. If nothing comes up, I can then dismiss it from my mind. Sure, Andy accepted the doctor's judgment. When do you want to do this? Well, it's rather up to you. I know you're busy with your professors. No particular hurry. After all, it's been down there 4 centuries. Hardly going to swim away, is it? Andy looked thoughtful. Well, we're not diving tomorrow. The profs want to see a bit of London above ground for a change. I've arranged for one of your students to take them on a tour, so I suppose we could make a start tomorrow night. Splendid, beamed Lyle. Anything else? Sorry? You said you wanted me to do a couple of things. Oh, yes, indeed I did. At that he got up and paced towards one of the bookshelves. He scanned left and right, up and down, pulling out several books. Ah, here it is. Sitting back down, he held up a frail and faded The National Gallery, a room-by-room guide. There's a possibility, he went on, that the same fellow who once owned that case may have deposited something like a satchel or backpack here. I'd like you to come and help me search for it. We'll need lanterns, spades, those sorts of things. Why not ask Bill to come along too? He's a strong chap. Your National Gallery, that's the one in Mandela Square, yes? Yes, that's it. Andy deliberated, looking up at the ceiling. Tomorrow's out, Saturday too. I've got church on Sunday. What about Monday? Can we do it then? Monday's fine. The delegation leaves Sunday morning, thank God. I'm obliged to host a farewell banquet for them on Saturday evening. You're invited, of course. Andy nodded. Well, good. I'll arrange the kit. Come over around 11? Splendid. He glanced at one of the fine old clocks and stood up. Well, I'd better take my leave of you, Doctor. He hoped to conclude the meeting, as he had other matters to attend to, and the doctor seemed to be in a maudlin mood. The last thing he wanted was to spend another long night drinking with him, being subjected to yet another one of his dreary monologues. Oh, of course. Lyle looked disappointed and got up slowly. Farewell, Andy, he said, proffering his hand. Outside Lyle's door, Andy was pulling on his boots when Bea approached, bringing a tray with a pot of tea. Sorry, got to go. By the way, is he okay? Seems under strain, got a twitch. She shook her head. It's this demotion and overwork. I think he's taking it harder than he lets on. See you later. Upon entering the library, she said, Here you are, Doctor. Brought you tea. He was standing back to her, facing the window. Thanks. Please just leave it there. He sounded downcast. Everything all right? He didn't reply. It's this wretched Chang business, isn't it? His head bowed. He shrugged and turned around. Then his shoulders started shaking. What followed next was a high-pitched mewing. Doctor, she said, putting down her tray. Oh, Doctor. But his body began to heave as great sobs poured out. She went over and wrapped her arms around him. She felt his lungs gulp after each sob gushed out. Now, sit down here. They sat together on the settee, but he slid onto her lap, weeping and blubbing over her knees. She stroked his head and rocked him. She had never seen him break down before. He had always seemed the epitome of aristocratic imperturbability. He must have bottled up the pressure for months, and now it was all flooding out. She shut her eyes and said a silent prayer. He was falling apart. London was falling apart. People were running for cover. Soon she would be jobless and homeless. This was worse than she had imagined.